right. Let's see if anybody comes in. See if anybody comes in before we start and begin. Let's see if anybody comes in. Let me go ahead and mute my phone because people don't leave me alone. They have the gall to text and call in the middle of my live stream. Alright, wait for folks to come in before we begin. Conversation pieces. We'll be talking about some art stuff. Talking about the work of yours truly. The EMA, we're going to talk about Retconism. This new movement. We're just waiting for a couple of people. As soon as I see the little notification joint. Send out a couple invites real quick. See where everybody at. Boop, boop. Boop, boop, boop. Boop. Boop, 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 boop. Boop, 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 boop. Boop, boop, boop. Boop, boop, boom. Bing, bing, bing. Bing, bing, bing. Bing, bing, bing. Alright. So let's see. Wait for somebody to come on in. I got stickers and stuff. Oh, there we go. Alright, so I guess I'll stop playing around with stickers. I keep on wanting to do that. Alright, so we'll go ahead and begin. I've been unmasked. No, just kidding. I don't really care. I have multiple masks. Actually, I have a new mask that I did recently. What if I got different masks for different occasions, you know? All right, so we'll begin. Whether we have an audience of one or an audience of thousands, you're going to get the same show. For those of you who don't know, I am the EMA Energy Master Allah. And I am an artist. I've done every form of creative expression you can dang near think of. Visual art, music, running with Wu-Tang and George Clinton for some years. In terms of visual arts, I graduated from a fine arts high school here in Macon, Central High School. Go Chargers. Yeah. Peace. I see you, Shamika. All right, so tonight I'm giving you a preview of some of the works, going to break down some of the symbolism in some of them. As I put in the event description, everything that I show you tonight is for sale. You can reach out privately after the stream and to discuss pricing and different things of that nature. But most importantly, want to be able to make sure that you are familiar with the Retconism movement. And in order to do so, I think we'll go ahead and dive right in. Let me see if it'll let me flip my camera. All right, let me see here. There we go. All right, so we're going to start with this guy over here, which is the Retconist Manifesto. So typically whenever an art movement starts out, the individual or group of individuals will write up a manifesto that basically says what they're about. Now I'll go ahead and read that for you. It says, in light of the rampant rearrangement of reality due to the bombardment of symbols from commercialized individuals, the Retconist ventures to retcon the retcon by reconstructing the destruction of history and deconstructing language to its quantum particles to construct from them constellations congruent to our origin. Black equals source. Black is a registered trademark of the universe, used in commerce to redact its own history, covered in thermodynamic entropy. We the We find the identity of this original entity interesting and to be the vital piece in establishing peace. So, peace. All right, so in a handful of words, basically what we're talking about. So to start off, so to retcon, that's a word that means retroactive continuity. That's when they do this in comic books, they do this in television. Whenever a new bit of information is introduced that basically changes the way you look at the entire history of something, that's what happens. And those of us on the Wu-Tang side of things, we have knowledge of self, and we were introduced to the concepts of the black man being God and a number of lessons that came along with that. And without getting into I guess you would say like a religious debate or something, because it's not a religion, basically introducing a new place to stand from in the assessment of the history of our people. It gives you a very different telling of historical events, even those not listed explicitly in those lessons. Like when you compare and contrast dates and things of that nature, it gives you a very interesting, very compelling type of telling. And so this phenomenon occurs with any type of information being introduced. There was a lot of things that were omitted from history for one purpose or another. You had people who, because of their own beliefs, they didn't have much background knowledge on what everybody else was thinking in terms of how the world and universe works and stuff. So it's interesting what happens when everybody just gets together and has a conversation. And so other things that are involved in here, meme. So you probably are familiar with the word meme as it relates to little funny pictures that they show on social media. But this is a very, very old concept that is central to what's happening with retconism. So based on my studies and based knowledge, it occurred to me that you can't really assess the evolution of humans solely based on genetic evolution, meaning what you inherit physically from your parents. You also inherit certain ideas and idea structures, and that's essentially what a meme is. It's a thought form. It's the equivalent to the gene of thoughts. So these things that spread and multiply, and through non-genetic means. And so you can't really fully describe a human being without also describing the chain of thoughts that led to them being the them that they are today. And then last but not least, you have the concept of entropy. Entropy is in any closed system, so that you're getting into science. So for those of y'all who are engaged in the conversation of STEM versus STEAM and trying to figure out how art fits into science, technology, engineering, and math, we're talking about entropy, which comes from the second law of thermodynamics, which basically says that as you move forward in time, a closed system will get more and more chaotic, which is to say that it takes a lot more information to describe that system. And so the same thing happens with language. Words, they mean something in the beginning, and then by the time 100, 1,000 years rolls around, people have entirely forgotten the meaning. They look at books like the Bible and they interpret them by the meaning that we use for those words today and not the meaning that was used during that time period. So as you can guess, that causes a lot of confusion. And so as you'll see, as we move on to one of the next pieces, this is what you call a diptych, which means that it has two panels. So these are two separate panels, two 16 by 20 canvases that are part of a single work. So that's what a diptych means. The DI in diptych, of course, meaning two. All right, but as I was saying, you'll see that in a lot of my works, if not all of them, you have these like black figures, and in some cases they may resemble people. In some cases they may resemble animals and different forms like this. But there's usually a central black figure because I feel like we, by assessing our history solely based on the usage of or the purpose of blackness as it relates to America, American slavery, and even what we typically understand of our connection to Africa, it vastly limits us because the color black itself, it has its origins are tied to the origins of the universe. All things in the universe emerged from blackness. You wouldn't be able to see stars if it didn't have a black backdrop. So that's and this is actually a central concept. The interesting thing about it is that I just described is a central concept in the Hindu faith. So in the Hindu faith, they believe that all life emerged from blackness. So we know that on a factual, physical level, as it relates to humanity originating in Africa. We know that all human beings started in Eastern Africa, but in Hindu religion, they through the stories of the goddess Kali, they basically say that the blackness of the universe is what everything emerged from. Even in the Bible, you have that notion of, let there be light, like everything emerged from that darkness. Then you have scientists with the Big Bang, so it was dark, and then there was light in the universe. So that's a central concept. So if we, based on what I told you here, if our heritage isn't simply a physical heritage, that means that we also have to take into account the ideas and structures that have repeated throughout the universe. Even before we had organisms on this planet, you had certain systems and certain energetic structures that atoms were starting to form that were essential to us being able to walk the place. So technically those same things are ancestors. They say that we are made up of stardust because all the atoms that make us up come from exploded stars. All right. I kind of wanted to do these later, but I'll go ahead and get into them since I'm over this way. All right, so here we have a triptych of sculpture. So these three go together, and I call them mumdums. It isn't like an official title for the triptych. I just finished these recently, but you basically have these three skulls. Each of them feature coins somewhere in their design. You've got these labels and things that are pretty much, you got like my signature and different stuff in there, but intended to kind of resemble the packaging for like figurines and collectibles, because we live in this commercialized society. So these the 3D the sculptures that I've done recently, they have some themes of consumerism and things of that nature, but more importantly, not just the consumption of products, but the consumption of language. Whereas you could look at the ordering of these skulls as kind of an evolution of man, where you had those who started out in Eastern Africa and then migrated out. So you had the various brown and yellow cultures that emerged from that, and then gradually you had the I guess you would call the European, the white people who emerged from basically descended from the Indians. And I'm not talking about Native Americans, I'm talking about actual people from India. So before you get all huffy puffy about terminology, I mean actual Indians from India. All right. And okay, so yeah, so you have that triptych. Did them in these 3D glass cases, which is pretty cool. All right, and then over here I also did a 3D diptych. So you've got these two. These are some of my first usages of pastels in my recent work as well. Like I started incorporating pastel and as a complement, a supplement to the paint. I have my signature colors, which are black and white and red and blue, more specifically it's more of a crimson and crimson and cerulean. if you will. And this stuff on the back, I don't feel like turning those around just yet. But yeah, but basically this you got like this pig, like looks more like those little tiny pigs you see in like South America and stuff like that. And then you got like this wolf looking character, and and then there's little things hidden around it. But there also, so you see that there's this theme, running theme of this gauze that kind of resembles like the wrapping of mummies. So you got your mumdom. A mummy is basically a rich zombie, like they were pharaohs and stuff like that, so they made their money, but then what good does that do if you're still blind, deaf, and dumb, in the sense of not knowing your origin or your ties to some of the things that I've been describing so far? But we'll move along. All right, so coming this way. Okay, well, we got some stuff sitting in the chair. So I've got a couple index cards that I actually painted, and got some interesting stuff. This one's called Herd Immunity, so it's like this is it's low key a self portrait of when I went to Sotheby's in New York City, and then shortly after caught COVID. And that's largely what triggered me to start back in visual art painting. I didn't have anything to do for 2 weeks, so I was basically sat in the room and painted. But one of the things I loved doing was basically creating forms that, on first glance and from a distance, they just look kind of simple and accessible. But then, like, when you get in close, you'll start seeing like little nods to like basically just flex that ain't just some person doodling. Like, of course, that the way that the eyes are arranged there, that's a nod to Picasso and Cubism. All right. Yeah, thanks to everybody who just joined. Yeah, we've just been building on some of the works. And then mind, instead of mind, M-I-N-D, mind is in the ideas that have been gathered, so if you know anything about Picasso, he developed Cubism from, among other influences. He saw the way that they drew figures in Africa. They had a very particular way of doing these figures, so with the idea of showing forms the way that we actually see them, as opposed to trying to make a detailed reproduction of them. Because, like a lot of the detail paintings, like from the Renaissance, they were more like photographs. So it's like, so there wasn't nearly as much a need for realism once the camera came around, once photography came around. But, a lot of those techniques and things that they used to use, people still kind of preserve those things for, historical context. But what these cave paintings and African tribal paintings, in some cases some shamanic paintings, what they were able to capture was, for instance, if you were drawing a bull from the side, if you're looking at a bull in real life, you may only be able to see one of the horns because it'll overlap the other horns. So they would turn the form such that you'd be able to see that it has two horns. And so that was the central concept of Cubism when Picasso started that. He wanted to be able to show the face and the form from different angles on a 2D type of plane or whatever. So just a nod like that, something that's simple from a distance, but when you get up on it, you start realizing there's some other little stuff. And also here's some Qigong stuff in there. If you're familiar with any Eastern philosophy, the heart is red and the kidney is blue in Chinese medicine. All right, moving right along. I also have this guy right here. I actually did this one while I was in the middle of an art event on Zoom. I was supposed to be listening and paying attention, and then instead I was doodling this. And basically what it ended up coming out, just to give you an insight into my process, I start by laying out some kind of like, guidelines based on geometry and the way that the human eye works, how it's drawn around, because I have a graphic design background. And from there, I'll do some automatic drawing, some splotching type techniques that are typically used by like abstract expressionists and surrealists. And what I'll do, as opposed to going in knowing what I want the end result to be, I'll just kind of let the work guide me. Like I'll look and basically I get to be like a child looking at shapes in the clouds. You know how you point, you say, oh, that one looks like a fire truck, and oh, that one looks like a bunny. And that's usually what ends up happening. I'll look at it, and incidentally, that's a technique that's actually used by shamans and other practices in order to map the subconscious. So when you just kind of let your hand do what it wants, and you just kind of do like little splotches and stuff like that, it brings things up from your subconscious that you may not even know are there. So I like to do that and just kind of see what kind of ideas are coming out of me. And then once I give them an identity, I'll link certain information together on the in the figure after the forms have kind of appeared. I'll kind of create a narrative by connecting bits of information. I like to think of them as constellations because that's really what you're doing. You're drawing lines between stars that seem distant from each other. And so in this case, the central figure that says solar on his chest, that's a reference to where the solar plexus is located on the body. This he ultimately ended up representing Jack Johnson, who was a black boxer in the early 1900s, who was infamous for basically be doing what he wanted to do. He dated all the white women he wanted. He made all the money and spent all the money he wanted during a time where black people didn't have a lot of rights and couldn't do what they wanted in the country. And in fact, the laws regarding transporting a person across state lines, being kidnapped, and was actually created to stop Jack Johnson from traveling state to state with his white girlfriend. So, but he basically represents the idea of succeeding in a field where you're not supposed to be able to succeed, due to those contextual type of things. And then as you'll see, I've got like some references to some of the richer artists in the game, including like Damien Hirst, who has like the multi-million-dollar crystal skulls that people question if it's really art. You've got Jeff Koons, who does the shiny balloons, so he basically inflates chrome to represent familiar objects, particularly like ones that children would play with. And so that's a play on the idea of pop art. He makes balloons, so it's art that could pop. So it's a lot of jokes I like to put in there as well, but that's the overall theme. And so you'll see that being a recurring thing. You may also notice that in all my works, it has that trademark symbol. If you were listening to the Retconist manifesto, I make a statement in there about black being a registered trademark of the universe. A trademark is something that basically signifies that you're using something in commerce, and commerce is it's an exchange. It's a transaction, and so we have a karmic transactional relationship with the universe. What we put out comes back to us. We're all about action. Karma actually means action, so we're constantly in motion. But motion is a relative phenomenon because the universe itself is kind of like our body. Like even if we're standing still, our heart is still pumping and circulating blood through our body. There's things moving inside of us, but because the whole is not moving relative to the things in the environment, we say that person is standing still. And so because the universe is everything, it doesn't have anything to move relative to. So it's technically the entire universe is still, but you can look at all of the things within it as the organs that appear to be moving relative to each other. All right. So in that regard, we have a transactional universe that we live in, and being that black is the source of all existence, everything exists by virtue of that backdrop of blackness of space. That's why I say black is a trademark of the universe, and that's also that also connects to the fact that actual black people were used as a product in commerce in this country. So if you kind of understand that relationship, you can see how certain patterns repeat themselves throughout the universe in some shape or form. And unless you understand your mimetic inheritance the same way that you understand your genetic inheritance, you can't break down some of the significance that you have around the meanings of certain words and processes and things, and otherwise be able to extract something that could be useful in constructing useful structures that bring us together instead of tear us apart. All right. So moving along, we got this guy right here. He's like I think this was it's not the first index card I did, but it was one of the first ones I did without paint because I just didn't have my materials available. So this is marker majority. You see the big bad wolf and the pig. That tends to be a theme that's a recurring theme, for consumption and things of that nature. And you see that the piggy up here, he says GMO. Pigs are one of the earliest examples of genetically modified organisms in human history. The Chinese are credited for teaching Westerners how to domesticate pigs and things of that nature. And, there's that early history of domesticating dogs, domesticating pigs, and animals like that. And unfortunately for us, a lot of those same principles that were taught by original people to the Westerners was used in order to breed slaves in the 1800s. In the early 1800s, it became outlawed to import African slaves. So you basically had to get all your new slaves by breeding the slaves that you had. And they used a lot of the same domestication techniques that you would use in order to modify a pig. If you don't know how that works, pigs were once wild boars, the same way that dogs were once wild wolves. And so once you hold them in domestication and you organize them according to certain traits, you can breed anything, including people, for certain characteristics. And in the case of slavery, you wanted women who were strong breeders. You wanted men who had strong backs, things of that nature. So you still got a lot of those same characteristics that are distinct to American black people to this day. And you'll notice that a lot of times when we have immigrants come to the country, they tend to be smaller a lot of times. And that's because they haven't gone through that, that same process of, breeding for specific qualities like that. All right. Got some prints here that are actually I guess I'll jump to the Big Brother version of that, because that is actually a large piece. I forget that I mentioned. I got it written down somewhere. Let's see. This guy is the mimetic ancestry of self and is a 32 by 48 inch work. It's one of my larger ones. I got fortunate enough to come across some larger canvas, but I have prints for this one available. You can inquire about those. But this one right here was fun because I took a lot of things that were in my sketchbook and then repurposed them for the piece. So this is one entire picture that became the dreadlock-like structures on this figure right here. And so you have some interesting details about the evolution of language, being able to see its evolution. So basically you start out here. So if you pull back, you'll see the figure of what appears to be an African elephant. Once again, interestingly enough, I did not set out or intend before starting to draw an elephant. It's just that when I started laying down geometry and doing splotches and stuff, I saw what looked like an elephant, so I started to run with that theme. And so what that allowed me to do, something I learned, because what I'll tend to do is I may have like an idea or a theory about something, and then I'll research a little bit more about it. Particularly when it comes to those things that we feel we know, like we know what an elephant is, but is it so obvious a thing, is so common a thing for us to kind of know that we don't really look beyond the surface? And so one interesting detail that I learned was that you can tell African elephants from other elephant species on other continents because they say their ears are the largest and are actually shaped similar to the continent of Africa. So that's how you can tell an African elephant from other elephants. And so in doing so, I basically use the ear to establish a world map. And so you've got right here, if you look close, it says the cradle. So we got the cradle of civilization. So we'll distinguish between the root of civilization versus the cradle of civilization. So the cradle of civilization is where our oldest common ancestor for all human beings emerged, Australopithecus, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. You can look it up on your own time, but the oldest common ancestor of all upright walking hominids, human species, started out in the eastern part of Africa near where Ethiopia is today. And then those people migrated and spread out in different directions, and that's how everybody else emerged. But one of the early migrations was to where we call the root of civilization, which is in the Arabian Peninsula, and there's evidence to suggest that this is where the Y chromosome, as we know it today, for Homo sapiens sapiens, which is us, where that first emerged as a result of a mutation in the SRY gene, which is also associated with brain function. So this is where your oldest male ancestor, they call him it's Adam. It's the I forget, genetic Adam. It's something like that or whatever. But your oldest common ancestor of men. So we all men relate back to this guy, but all humans are related back to this first female ancestor right here, in the form of Australopithecus. All right, so yeah, women were here first, and then they had their process for multiplying. Then that was similar to most mammals, but then we developed a Y chromosome that was able to stand the test of time, because in most species the Y chromosome usually drops off, like it only carries but so many unique genes for the purposes of multiplying and things. But in our species, it has been tied to some functions of brain function. So that's an interesting thing to look into. And then you may see the little description. You may be paying attention to those R&B fans out there. You see the God equals Drew Hill, You Are Everything remix. So that's just kind of a nod to because we're moving east in the map over toward India, where the Proto-Indo-European language emerged, and then everything got all wacky as language broke down as it headed north and west. But that concept of you being everything and everything being you, everything is manifested in everything. If you break down the way that reality actually works, you do not interact with actual physical reality most of the time. The things that you see are actually the light that has bounced off of an object and then been interpreted and pieced together by your brain. So you interact with an image of your surroundings that is actually a fraction of a second in the past, if you will, because it takes time for that light to bounce off of that object and hit your brain. So you're really interacting with an image that you have formed around it. And then there's studies now that are saying that the evolution of why we see things the way we see them, like there's a whole thing around that. Like we might be looking at some of these colors and some of these shapes now, and that's not what they look like to us, thousands of years ago. So that's something interesting. But that's that piece. And then once again, I've got different nods to different artists throughout history. Like that's, you may, if you're an art history buff, you may recognize that one. It's the I forget what it's called. It's something Venus, but it's a one of the oldest tiny sculptures that they uncovered, an artifact that may have been a fertility statue. And then you've got like a nod to Basilitz, who famously paints all his paintings upside down. So there's all kind of little details like that. RIP shout out to Rem LZ, if you never heard of him, graffiti artist that influenced a lot of people and worked with Basquiat, and so but a lot of people don't know him like they know Basquiat, so definitely check him out. All right, moving right along, so we don't run out of time here. All right, so I did this guy. I believe it's called Ensemble Arabesque, and it is done on a repurposed crate and cardboard. I like to do things on found materials, and I can sketch and draw, like, with the best of them, like especially when it comes to figures, because like I was a character artist and things like that. So I was like growing up, when I would draw, I was kind of obsessed with things having to look like something, and I was used to people in school like, oh, can you draw me the Scooby-Doo for my birthday or whatever, and I can make it look exactly like Scooby-Doo. But I found freedom in my adult years in creating from a place of play and not knowing what is going to come out to be at the end. Like there's some underlying skill and training, in there. So there's some discipline, but then I allow myself to be free and then, create form. So a lot of times I don't know what it's going to ultimately like. I couldn't have planned for this guy right here to basically be such that you could almost see like three faces in this one face. Like if you look here, if I isolate it here, it looks like a face turned to the side, and you got that. So that's something I kind of picked up from Cubism in that regard. And there's just like little details that come in there, like you got the head, ass, or whatever. So if you know anything about what do we call it, roasting, jonesing, the dozens, I don't know what you call them, but when we crack on each other in the black community or whatever, like head ass, like that's one of the go-to cracks. Like like if you drink a lot of Sunkiss, somebody might say, yo, old Sunkiss head ass. You know what I'm saying? Peace, what's up, Ronald? Yeah. And so, but that's a double entendre to tie into. Imagine being the leader, but you're a complete idiot. So it's like you're the head ass, you're the ass in charge. Like in terms of like a donkey. So I can do a lot of double meanings like that. You got the Wrong Foods logo, of course. That's a play on the Whole Foods logo, and so that's an ongoing an ongoing theme in some of my work, talking about the wrong food. And when we talk about being fed the wrong food, we're talking about the wrong information. And so you got the baby elephant here. If you're familiar with the concept of baby elephant syndrome, they say like when you're training elephants, they tie them to a post when they're babies, and so they get so used to being tied to this post that when they become adults, you can actually remove the rope and that elephant still won't move further than the distance that it was able to move from that post with the rope on it. You know what I mean? And so this is a type of conditioning. And so likewise, there are certain boundaries that we do not cross, and certain things we don't do because we were trained and conditioned from the time we were children not to, not to take certain risks and things of that nature. And it's usually those people who are able to break out of those kind of binds that end up excelling and changing the world at the end of the day. So yeah, just a little bit of the science on that one. What else? Now this was kind of experimental. This wasn't, I don't know, I was just playing around one morning because I made a stencil. Got our Mavicus logo. We mad, and so I created a stencil and was testing it out on the cardboard. And as usual, like I'll do something and I'll look at it like, I kind of like this. Let me see what happens if I do this to it. And let me see what happens if I do this to it. So this ended up coming out. And so it basically just became kind of like a little cardboard toy, if you will, in the sense that, I can fold the arms back and then release them. And it's like somebody throwing their hands up, like freeze, stop right there, put them hands up or whatever. But, and it also, you can't really see it. I did some kind of Cy Twombly style indentation into the paint, but there's like kind of an encrypted message, if you will, that basically says God exists as a word in this sentence. So I felt like that statement was something that could bring a lot of people together and eliminate a lot of confusion because regardless of what you think the nature of God's existence is, or if you think he doesn't exist at all, one thing that we can't agree on is that God exists as a word in that sentence. I just literally said the word God, and then maybe that's kind of the point. Maybe did you ever think that by something being devoid of meaning, it's what generates all other meaning? Just like how I described earlier, how the blackness of space is how you're able to see the stars against it. So all things exist by virtue of something else. You can't have mountain peaks unless you have mountain valleys. You know what I'm saying? So, hey, I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm just saying that's a place to look from. Got an incomplete piece. It's close, I guess, but I'm still playing around with it. But basically, what we have here is kind of a pop art style multi panel thing with a Bugs Bunny figure that's based around. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it was a 1941 cartoon that's like if you look up banned Looney Tunes episodes, they talk about it. But it was an episode called Scrub Me Mama with a Boogie Beat, where it had some very controversial depictions of Black Americans in there. So yeah, and so and so this overall piece, you see like gradually the image gets covered by gold. And so this is kind of another consumerism statement where, well, consumerism and some, I guess you could say some capitalism, some themes of that, where this truth of these racist ass Looney Tunes cartoons is kind of buried over time because of how much money that the Bugs Bunny property has brought Warner Brothers over the years. To the point where you don't even see the rabbit no more. You just see that gold. You just see it shiny gold. Ooh, shiny. You know what I'm saying? So that tends to happen in history. It's a thing. All right, and this big, I'm gonna have to back up for her because she's kind of big. Hold on. Ugh. This big beautiful lady right here. This is the largest piece I did. It was done on cardboard, and it was actually a repurposed piece. Maybe I could turn it. So I don't know if that makes your view screwy. I'll turn it back. But this thing right here is chock full of all sorts of surprises. So instantly off rip, you see that central black figure. She appears to be a woman, and you get close up on her and you start kind of looking at some of this anatomy. You start seeing some interesting things emerge. For one, you see two faces emerge. This is the first piece where these guys I call the blue faces emerge. So like there's all these kind of characters that kind of pop up and appear as I go, because as I said before, I do like automatic drawing is a core element of these retconist pieces, and so things will emerge that I wasn't even expecting. So you have this face right here who's a blue face, but from his mouth, and then basically now his face is formed by her. You've got rib cage, you've got her breast, you've got bone in her leg ends up forming his face, but his mouth forms another face in conjunction with her leg bones and her foot bones, or whatever, the emergence of the red face. And so this is an important image because basically the genome for the entire human species is contained in the black woman. Like those first hominids that emerged from Eastern Africa. So the materials needed to make everybody on the planet start with that black woman. And then, as I told you before, blackness used in my works is referring not just to black as a racial identity, but the actual blackness of the universe itself, that backdrop, that source that that primordial radiation that basically generates our entire reality. You know what I'm saying? So there's that double meaning there. And right here in the fun parts, there's a nod to Georgia O'Keeffe, that's where the GA comes from, who famously drew a lot of flowers and things that clearly represent uteruses. And then you see I make a lot of pokes at Damien Hirst and his work. He's the guy that had the work where he preserved a dead shark. And, I guess as a commentary on life and death. And, he had some pretty interesting works. Not to knock his skill, but he just kind of, it's a very hip hop sentiment. Like, I don't have any problem with these people, but I think people who look at these artists and write about these artists, it's not nearly so much about the artist so much as their attitude toward their artist, their ideas about their artist. So it's like they're not relating to the actual artist, they're relating to their mental image of their artist. And so you'll see I'll do similar things with like Basquiat, because as a young black artist who's not born of immigrant parents and who came from a hip hop background, before I can even show my work, a lot of times comparisons are made between me and Basquiat. Yeah, I get that our birthdays are like 2 days apart, so we're both Sagittarians. Whoop whoop, cuspies, and kind of what he accessed something similar but mostly through drug usage, but my access to the subconscious comes largely due to like my martial arts and healing practices of understanding meditation and things of that nature and being able to achieve certain mental states, but either way, you basically accessing some of the same tools, and I'm not embarrassed to admit that I didn't learn a lot about Basquiat until this year. Like I've always been aware of him, because you can't help, because you're always going to hear it come up. Anytime you're a black kid that draws, somebody's going to bring a Basquiat to you. But most of what I learned about him was as an adult, because when I was in high school and I was in IB art, my teacher, like I almost feel like I wanted to do my final paper on, like I may have heard of him and then wanted to do a paper on him, but she steered me in the direction of doing a paper on Keith Haring, who was a gay white contemporary of Basquiat. They were friends, and you've probably seen his work in all sorts of things, like Sesame Street, all over the place. He has, in fact, I think like this guy right here is more like a kind of like a Keith Haring style figure, which is actually my two children. If you turn it upside down, I think it'll show correctly for you or whatever. That's my daughter hugging my son or whatever. So my two kids, but basically like a Keith Haring style sort of thing. But anyways, she felt that would, I guess, expand my, because it's easy for me to do a paper on somebody who comes from a similar background to me, of course. And I ain't even gonna lie, I didn't research much whenever I did my papers, because most of my papers were hip hop themed in high school, and I counted on the fact that one, I already had a pretty extensive base knowledge of hip hop, and then two, that my teachers, nice as they were just racist enough to where they weren't actually going to read a bunch of books on hip hop to see if what I was saying was true. So I got away with murder a lot of times, just like writing a bunch of facts that I knew on like my note cards, and then just looking online and just pulling up a list of sources just to match with them, and then they never checked them. Like I still got my grades, but hey, I was out to prove a point. But case in point, so I have these little like right here we got this little mini character Basquiat, because everybody, they're not nearly as concerned with Basquiat, the man, as they were with the fact that one of his paintings sold at Sotheby's for $100 million recently. Speaking of Sotheby's, for those of you who thankfully have stuck with me this far, so I got word about a week or so ago that my Wu-Tang brothers are doing an auction with Sotheby's in March of next year, so March of 2023. This isn't public knowledge, but I don't think it's really a secret. Like, who y'all gonna tell? But they're supposed to be doing an auction of some like memorabilia and things, and so my dude Mook, who is the CEO of Wu-Tang Management, he knows that, you know, I'm back on my visual arts thing, because, you know, everybody in Wu-Tang can rap from the top to the bottom. The janitor at Wu-Tang can rap, you know. But then I was like, okay, well, that's not the only form of creative expression that I have. My first love is visual art. So I finally, you know, felt that I was in an environment where I could be appreciated in that regard without feeling pressure to have to do one thing or another. They got plenty of great MCs. You got Method Man and Ghostface and all of them. Can Inspect the Deck, who has some of the most legendary rap verses, so they don't need more legendary rappers. But I will be the first legendary Wu-Tang visual artist. So bong to that. But I was coming back over here to show you my other Basquiat character, who's Sour Patch Skiat. So once again, I can't help that the splotches ended up looking like a Sour Patch Kid with dreads. I thought that shit was cool, and I used that to basically demonstrate something interesting that I learned, which was that, all right, so originally Sour Patch Kids were called Mars Men, like back in the 70s, right? And this is a demonstration of how you can mash two things together or create two of something, and then the original gets forgotten, if you will, or the significance around the other is gotten. So this is a technique that's used oftentimes in iconoclasm, which has historically been used by cultures who wanted to come in and either wipe out a culture or desecrate a culture. But there's also the purpose of, if in the case of somebody like a Basquiat, if we're more concerned with the with controversy surrounding that artist, or if we're too concerned with how much money was made by that artist, it kind of stifles our ability to extract other lessons from that artist and to see them as significant to art history. You know what I mean? And so typically whenever something like this is, when two things are juxtaposed in this way, a famous artist with a popular kid's candy or whatever, it's usually seen as comical. That's one of the key ingredients to comedy. But comedy does these type of ironic things in order to point to something, to make a point about it. And so in this case, it nods back to the works of Baudrillard, who wrote Simulacra and Simulation, which is one of the books that the Wachowski brothers had the cast of The Matrix read before filming, because it basically told how we have these representation, these symbols, these I guess representation was a perfect word, of things that people get so familiar with that they forget the original thing. You know, it's like, imagine you're a kid who's had only McDonald's hamburgers your whole life, these fast food type hamburgers, to the point they don't know what it's like to have a homemade hamburger, and doesn't know that that's even a concept, that you can make a hamburger at home. This is what we're talking about. You know, so you've got the old versus the new. You've got Sour Patch Kids today, but if you're old enough to remember back when they were called Mars Men, you know, that's what it was. And so I also use that Mars as a means to talk about semiotic war, which is the war of symbols. How in our society and just as a species, we have symbols that are vying for dominance. You know, like meanings of words that are vying for dominance. Words like gay, for instance, that just meant happy once upon a time, and then got totally tied to homosexuality. You know what I'm saying? So you have people today who never knew of a time when gay just simply meant anybody being happy. You know, so that's the kind of symbolic war that's going on, and it's not being waged between flesh. Like you know how they say, got the saying in Ephesians that says, in fact, it's Ephesians 6:12. I know that because I was just looking at it this morning, but it says it's not flesh that we wrestle against, it's principalities and authorities. And the authority at the end of the day isn't flesh. It's either it's language, it's symbols, it's the meanings that we attach to things, even God, because depending on what our meaning that we have attached to us in terms of who God is, that's going to determine the way that we live our lives. But those, oh, I forgot all about this. So before we get out of here, I think the last one we'll look at, this is a recent triptych that I did. So once again, remember, a triptych is a collection of 3 panels to constitute a single work. And this one was kind of fun to do because, you know, once again, I look at the figures that emerge. And then this is after I started using more pastel. So you start seeing like these forms and these use of colors to, you know, emphasize form and the mix of white paint with the pastel to get different textures and things. I was just having a ball. I was having fun. And these were 3 I was about to do in a rush because there was some submission going on with Making Arts Alliance, and then they wanted to have like stuff that you were willing to sell for like $100 or less. But I said, fuck that, I ain't selling nothing for $100 or less. Unless, of course, the square inches of it times 5 adds up to $100, because that is the market minimum based on the artist index that you're able to charge on average. But unfortunately, a lot of people, because they're desperate for money, they'll sell for way less than what their work can be worth, and as a result, it impacts the amount that other artists in that area are able to charge. And so you got people out here selling their Mona Lisas, you know, like I've seen some amazing work around here, but they out here selling them for crackhead prices, you know, on the corner or whatever. So they hurting themselves in the long run. You know, it's good for short run, but in the long run, you got to put your foot down and say, pay me what I'm worth, motherfucker, because they good for undervaluing, you know, our talent a lot of times. And then they'll do us like Basquiat, where they'll buy a painting for $10,000 right after you die, and then turn around and then sell it for $100 million later down the line. So don't stand for that. But anyways, this is a cool play on Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. That's a very famous painting that depicts like it's a triptych that depicts the Garden of Eden and this heaven and hell theme. But I actually go in and I break down some of the words that we use. Like, for instance, I discovered that a hellhound, the word hound actually relates back to the cynics, who were, which means God, I mean, not God, like, it means dog, like, the cynics were Socrates' students. And so Socrates, his whole thing was about human life is about the desire for happiness, and how basically, and in Socratic method, the word method itself means the middle way. So, and that's a concept that appears in Buddhism. But basically, your desire is what basically keeps you tied to hell. Like, you wanting something infers that you don't already have it. You know what I mean? And so, so basically, Socrates was about using reasoning in order to, find happiness. And so whenever your reasoning is used, like if you break down what the origins of the words hell and hound are, when your reasoning is used to be divisive or cause more confusion or to conceal things, that's what we call a hellhound. And if you use your reasoning in order to make connections between information such that it brings people together, that's what we call peace. Peace is the absence of confusion. And then that state is what we call heaven, and so basically that's what all my work. In summary, I'll switch it back. We only got about a minute or so. Actually, we're out of time. But Retconist, the Retconism, anybody can be a Retconist if you're down for creating world peace by breaking down this history of ours in a way that doesn't rely so heavily on sequential events, but looking at each of these things as a state, a potential state that in a universe that is ever present and everlasting. But we'll talk about it more. Join the Discord channel. I'll drop that link in the group. If you want to make any inquiries about any particular work, please reach out to me. And on that note, I've been the EMA. I'm a mask back up so I can keep myself safe from in this semiotic war that we're in. And I'm gonna say peace to y'all. Good night.